we got connected because I had thrown up a post about a conversation that I had with another birth worker in a chat about, she felt like she was stuck during her prenatal. She wasn't really sure where to take the conversation with her. I'll use the word client for like easy purposes, but when I say client, I really don't mean like professional client. I mean women that we're supporting is what I would prefer to say, but for ease of access, we'll use client. So when speaking with her client, she was explaining that, yeah, she felt like she was hitting roadblocks and not really sure how to take her conversations deeper. And I'm sure she's not alone in that. And some people are a little harder to pull things out of than others, for sure. But I think by using certain kinds of dialogue and being mindful of the questions that we're asking, using open-ended questions, really puts the ball back in the woman's court. Mm-hmm. And then we can kind of feed off of that. So then you had commented on that and said that this is something that you do quite a bit of. So if you want to jump in and just kind of give people a brief overview about what your work is looking like right now.
Yeah, so I am a perinatal couples therapist here in Ontario. And I can't really be a perinatal couples therapist if I don't have a grasp on the perinatal world in general. And birth trauma has been a huge component to a lot of women's mental health, postpartum mental health, perinatal mental health. So the intersection is very interesting between couples dynamic and birth trauma. And so the birth trauma topic kind of had me going down a rabbit hole, probably because of my own birth trauma as well. But because I work as an advocate in human rights, obstetric violence is a huge component to the advocacy work that I do. So in supporting clients through the advocacy work and having those conversations, I did notice that women were seeking me out for their own birth experiences, but then they also were professionals in the birthing world. They were doulas, they were midwives. And so they kind of needed a supervision component of their session and also some space to kind of process their own stuff. So it definitely exists out there. The need is definitely out there. I'm hoping that there's going to be something on the horizon that can support large amounts of doulas, birth keepers, traditional birth attendants in a group or peer supervision type way. I think that's coming down the chute soon. But yeah, so I think there are many perks and benefits to not being in an industry where there's a regulatory body. The downside to it is that there's not this expectation to get the support.
Yeah.
Many regulatory bodies do have this, sometimes even like obligatory supervision, consultation, debrief component. And as doulas and birth keepers and traditional birth attendants, that's not necessarily a part of the requirements, right? So it's hard to kind of collect all the people that you maybe want in your community to help support you through these things. And when they're also peers who are going through the same struggles, part of what they're saying can be very validating, but then it's kind of like, okay, if we're all stuck in this hole together, how do we get out?
Yeah.
So my hope is that I'm not a frontline worker in the birthing world, so I can take enough of space and step back from the work that these beautiful humans do and support their own clients and mothers through, that I can be that support person for them.
Yeah, you touched on a few good things. So sometimes you're playing the role of like a mediator almost as well between perhaps clients and birth workers, and like you said, showing them that support and maybe helping them guide that conversation if they're getting stuck. Yeah, and like you mentioned, there's no obligation for us to be doing, like I think a lot of us call it maybe inner work, I could call it like self-mastery or striving for growth, ensuring that we are not only coming to this work as whole as we can intrinsically, but also making sure that like professionally we're also showing up. There's nobody really following us along, even if you are, using an accreditation system. There's no one like following you along to make sure that you're still, keeping up to par, or that there's not any additional areas for growth. You really do have to seek that out for yourself. That has to come from a place of wanting to do that. So that's super important. So what we can do is that we can just go back and forth. I can kind of pretend to be your client, and we'll see. We won't take too long of everyone's time, but just a few really good examples of where we can direct a conversation based on some past information that somebody might give us that we're serving. So I came up with a quick case study, like you had mentioned. It would be a good place to start. I'll read the little case study that I put together, pretty brief, and ideally as birth attendants we would have a lot more information than this, but everyone is going to start their conversation with their clients somewhere. And so these are maybe some of the things that I thought of, like if you had asked a woman, give me a brief rundown of like how I can support you, where we should start off. This might be something that a woman would kind of spew out at you, and then this is where we could start directing conversation, diving a little bit deeper, to make sure that she's feeling as supported as possible going forward. So here was the case study that we came up with. We named her Kara. Kara is 29, and she's around 20 weeks pregnant. She is married in a stable home with a 3-year-old. She wants to plan for a home birth, this time with a traditional birth attendant. So you can either pretend that you are the traditional birth attendant, or maybe she already has a traditional birth attendant and you're also serving her in this other capacity as a therapist. That's up to you. But she's been experiencing some blocks and some fears because her last planned home birth turned into a C-section. She was dropped by the midwives that she had in that pregnancy because she went too far in her gestation to 43 weeks. A cascade of interventions occurred after an induction turned sour. So she's trying to write a new story, and now she needs support. So we can jump in, and based off of that information that she's provided to us, maybe this is the first consult, we can see where we can take the conversation from here to dive a bit deeper.
Yeah, and I think before we start, I think that there's like a lot of worry about how you show up, because I think that non-therapists are always worried about doing therapy. And at the end of the day, it's not necessarily doing therapy. It's just about asking questions and listening and getting to know someone and know their experiences in life and getting curious about how they experience life. And you don't need a designation to be able to do that. You don't need a designation to have hard conversations or deep conversations. So I just like to preface that, is that if you have blockages of your own, or if you're scared to or have limiting beliefs about topics of conversation and what you're allowed to talk about, that's going to prevent you from asking those questions.
Yeah, so first making sure that you're addressing your own fears and hesitations, and not letting, like you said, your own blocks sit in the way between you and your client, because your experience is not your client's experience.
Yes.
So even having these hard conversations about maybe topics that have personally affected you, or you hold some kind of feelings about, to make sure that we really are stepping into that, it's more of a friend counseling position, a companion position, but it is still counsel. It is still therapy. Like, don't be scared to use those words. No, we're not claiming that we're, trained registered therapists, but we are providing therapeutic support when we're having these conversations. So yeah, you hit it right on the head there. So where would you take this conversation with her?
Well, maybe I'll take it from the lens of I'm not going to pretend to be a birth keeper or a doula or a traditional birth attendant, but if I were, that's, maybe I might be approaching this case study from a lens of like, oh, we don't say that or we don't do that, but I'm just going to do it. I'm going to be the rogue birth attendant for this conversation. So I think if this was my first meeting, what I would start off by doing is kind of talking about the lighter stuff. So I would say, I noticed that you had a 3-year-old. Can you tell me what their name is? You would say the name. And like, what kind of things do they like to do? What are they really interested in? What kind of, toys do they play with? And then you're kind of like bringing the conversation back to this very neutral topic. Usually mothers love talking about their kids. And then it's kind of an easy segue into, okay, so do you feel, again, consent? We're always looking for consent. Is it okay with you if we kind of move into a conversation about what so-and-so's birth was like for you? Yes, okay. So she's going to give you some details of the birth. You're going to be picking up on probably a lot of violations, because if we're talking about a scenario where midwives dropped at 43, we are dealing with a scenario where more likely than not, she was gaslit and asked to disengage or dissociate from her value systems, and her body would have been pathologized at that point. So the wonderful thing about validating someone is that you don't have to agree or disagree with, and I actually just reposted a cute little reel on this. You don't have to agree or disagree with what the person is saying to be able to validate their experience, right? So inside, you're probably taking inventory of all of the violations that happened to her, and you're going like, oh, that was illegal, that was against ethics, like that was not protocol, that's yada yada yada. You're doing all of this, which has its place, and it's good that you're able to do that, because it means that you're going to have a good lens for moving into the next birth experience for this person. So when she's kind of done explaining this heavy story that comes with a lot of emotion, you're probably going to want to mentor or mimic for her, just even like taking a breath. So remembering that when you have space to fill, you don't always have to fill it. You can just hold space, literally just silence, therapeutic use of silence, right? And making sure that with that space, when everyone's quiet and things are processing, there's a lot of nodding and soft facial features, and if it feels appropriate, kind of like leaning in a little bit. One thing that I suggest is not necessarily, if your client is becoming emotional and crying, I wouldn't necessarily recommend trying to find like a box of Kleenex to hand to her, because what that's going to communicate is, oh, your tears are making me really uncomfortable right now. Can you like deal with that? Get rid of that. So we're not wanting to do that. The other thing that you can kind of get used to, both for yourself and to kind of coach your client, is breathing, right? Sometimes when we have these huge emotional venting sessions, we forget to breathe. And sometimes we kind of have to remind ourselves to breathe. And if you're reliving an anxious experience, your body is remembering. So we're getting all of this tension. So even if you don't know what to say, it's a great opportunity to say, like, that sounds really heavy. Do you want just to take a minute to breathe with me? Maybe we could just do some deep inhales and slow exhales before we move on to the next kind of part of the conversation. chances are she's going to say, yeah, that feels really good. And you're going to just kind of take her cues and watch her body kind of go back to this relaxed state. And then ask for permission. Does this feel like a good time to kind of continue and carry on? Yeah, okay. Okay, so what I'm hearing is that there was a lot of stuff that kind of came up for you, and you felt abandoned, and you felt that, you know, all of the things, all of the value systems that you held around birth, nobody seemed to care about anymore, and you were discarded. And then you were left vulnerable and in a situation that you were terrified to be put in. And she's probably going to say yes. And the wonderful thing about what you just said was it doesn't have to be right. It doesn't have to be wrong in terms of agreeing. Like, you're not necessarily agreeing with the physicians and the midwives, and you're not necessarily agreeing with her. You're just letting her know what you heard her say. That's it. You're summarizing and validating her experience. And I think that when you're worried about what to say next, the reflective listening is always a helpful tool. And if you come at every conversation with the intention of reflective listening, you are really going to listen instead of getting caught up in, okay, I have to check this box, and I have to say this, and I have to say this, and I have to say this. At the end of the conversation, if there are any check boxes left to talk about, you will have space to talk about that. But remembering that all of your conversations with this vulnerable human being need to be rooted in connection before any kind of administrative stuff. So this is the only time where I would say that the closed-ended questions are helpful when you're kind of looking for clarification around, did I get that right? You validate, you summarize, did I get that right? Did I miss anything from your experience that you think was maybe important to talk about? Okay, so then we're kind of moving into themes. So she wants a home birth. So she was put in a position where she was abandoned. And then you can kind of ask the question, you know, were there other times in your life where you felt abandoned, where you felt left alone to make a big decision on your own, where you didn't feel like people were behind you and supporting you, or the support was very superficial? And she may or may not come up with some examples. Chances are she might. And in this, she gives her example. Maybe she says something like, yeah, when I was a kid, I was, my parents forgot to pick me up from school one day, and I was left waiting for them for an hour, and they never came and got me. That sounds pretty scary. Yeah, it was pretty scary. Okay, so when you think back to your first birth experience, do you remember feeling like that 7-year-old version of you left waiting for someone to rescue you, to pick you up, to help with the pain and the suffering and the emotional experience? Oh, well, I didn't think about it in that way. Okay, do you want to take a minute to think about that? Do you want to take a minute to maybe feel like or tap into the 7-year-old version of you? What does the 7-year-old in you need right now? Because that would have been the age she identified something. Okay, so we're just going to go with that age. Okay, so she's going to say, I don't know, maybe I just need some reassurance. Oh, okay. So tell me about needing reassurance. Do you feel like your experience in life, you've always second-guessed your decisions? Yeah, I guess so. Okay, so what are some like big life decisions you've made outside of having a family? Well, where we move, maybe buying a house, buying a car, going to school. Yeah, those are pretty big decisions. So when you were making those decisions, who did you consult? Who are your go-to people? My mom, my dad, maybe my sister. Okay, and did you take their advice? Is what they said, did you go with that? And she's going to say either yes or no, and then you're going to say, and how did you feel about moving in the direction that they advised you to move in? Well, I kind of really didn't want to take this program at school, but both my mom and my dad were kind of like, yeah, you should probably take this program. But deep down inside, I wanted to do this program. Okay, so if you could go back, you would probably do things differently. Yeah, okay. So if you could do things differently, and in hindsight, you could do things differently, what would you do differently? If I had a magic wand and I waved it and we could take you back to your first birth experience, what would you do differently? And she'll probably become really emotional in that experience, because she's going to be flooded with guilt, right? Because she's going to think, I should have done all these things differently. And you're going to let her experience that, because it's not your job to curate her emotions. And she's going to say, I should have. And you're going to say, no, what could you have done differently? Not what you should have done differently. What could you have done differently? I could have done this. Okay. So you could have said this to your midwife. Yeah, I could have said that to my midwife. Okay. So now that you have that wisdom and that you have that ability to take from that experience and move into your new experience, what are you choosing to leave and what are you choosing to take with you into this new experience, right? Oftentimes when I talk to people about fears in home births or fears in free birth even, we have to talk about what their experience and their relationship is like with accountability. Because we want to move to that space of radical accountability. If they've grown up in a very sheltered environment where people were making decisions for them all the time, taking radical responsibility is going to be very hard for them. Not that they can't do it, it's just going to be very hard. So if you can kind of work towards the concept of what radical responsibility is, and you're using informed consent and informed choice, informed decision making in all of your conversations anyways. So the whole point is to go about this differently than the medical system would. And the medical system has a very hard time talking about the cons of anything, the downsides of anything. So there are downsides with radical responsibility. Radical responsibility means that you could be the only one standing in the room saying, this outcome happened because of me, because this is what I chose. But that there's power in owning a situation instead of being victim to a situation. So you're going to talk about all the ways in which she's going to be asked to take radical responsibility in something. And then it's kind of like check-ins, constant check-ins, constant, how is this feeling for you? Is there anything that you need, if you think that I need to spend more time on? What challenges do you think, outside of the ones you've listed or the ones that you've talked about, is there going to be any mental hurdles to getting to this place, and how can we work through those? A really great activity when I was working more in person, a really great activity I did with like a lot of clients was I had a backpack or a tote bag in the room. And my son is very resourceful and can find any rock that's unique to all of the rest of the rocks. So I had a beautiful rock collection, thanks to him. And with my plethora of rocks, I was able to create a symbolic tool for clients. So people love to carry the things that they don't want to actually carry, but they carry it because they think it's their job to carry it. So sometimes walking into a room and having someone say, like, can I hold that for you? That feels really heavy. Can I hold that for you? But having something symbolic. So you fill the tote bag or the backpack full of significant words that this person has talked about, brought up. So maybe for this individual, it's going to be isolation, abandonment, grief, fear, responsibility, radical responsibility. And you're going to fill the bag with all the words that make sense for her, all of the heavy words, not the light words, the heavy words. And she's going to stand there and she's going to hold it. And then you're going to say, is that not heavy? And she's going to say, no, it's okay. And then you're going to say, well, put it down. So she puts it down. Is that heavy? No. Pick it back up. Is that heavy? Yeah, it's heavier. Okay, so what can I take from you? How about you give me one thing to take from you? Okay, here. She passes you a rock and you're holding the rock. Does that feel any lighter? No, not really. Give me something else to take from you. So she gets to pick what she's giving you. And what you say to her is, I'm just going to hold these things, these heavy things for our session, for our appointment today. If you want them back, you can have them back. But I am also happy to hang on to them for you. So the whole appointment's going to go by and you're going to have this nice little tote filled with all those rocks. And then the appointment's going to be over and you're going to say, did you want these back? And chances are she's going to say, I mean, from a logistical place, she's going to be like, no, I don't want your rocks back. But she's going to say no. And you're going to say, okay, well, I'm happy to hold them for you. They're not going to go anywhere. I'm not going to lose them. They'll be here whenever you want them back. And that permission to let the heavy stuff go and know that they're not gone forever. It's still there. And acknowledging like, oh, maybe I've been carrying heavy things and it's not serving any purpose except for reminding myself that I need to suffer, or that I'm obligated to carry heavy things. Or maybe somebody in my past, created this connection in my brain, this neural connection that I'm only worthy if I carry these heavy things.
That's beautiful. I love that. That's a really interesting, like, obviously the physical practice that you just explained is super impactful. And it's also an amazing metaphor for what is actually happening when we're willing to have these conversations, because we are taking those words on for ourselves. When she's able to speak them without fear of judgment or retaliation, if you use a lot of that kind of language with the person that may have actually had a role to play in the scenario that caused the pain, the trauma, the disconnect, the stress, the fear. If you use language with people that were actually present, that can be really off-putting for people. Not everyone can hold that. So finding the doula, the birth worker, the friend, the spouse that can actually hold that story for you is where you're able to let that go, release it as much as possible. So clearly anybody who just listened to that can see how those open-ended questions, can just quickly snowball into this amazing story, this flow that you get from somebody else when we're willing to, like you said, take a seat into active listening and just use those small prompts to continue conversation. You said a few good things about, like we can say, if we're a little bit stuck as to maybe we've come to an end of a specific spot in a story, where would you like to take this conversation next? We can say, this experience that you've just shared with me, has it linked to other past experiences or traumas? Did it bring anything up for you from the past? And then we can explore that, just like you said with the young version of herself. A lot of childhood traumas can start to rise up, domestic traumas, familial traumas. And then, like you mentioned, the hopeful steps into more self-responsibility. That's where a lot of the traditional birth attendants and birth keepers are really stepping into their own self-mastery, self-responsibility, because we understand when we can hold that, we can kind of usher in other women to say, yeah, like maybe you can take some of that on for yourself too. You don't have to be outsourcing your power, because scary as it is to hold on to it, it's way more impactful, and you're much less prone to these, adverse experiences like trauma and pain and coercion and manipulation. We can hold ourselves responsible for the decisions that we're making. So asking the question, well, what was your role in that, what you just explained to me? What was your role, do you think, in how that played out? So I think we covered a huge range of ways that we can use our questions to prompt deeper conversations with the women that we're serving. And it's really, the sky's the limit as to how deep we can go. The more time we can spend with people, stepping away from any kind of checklist, pre-made conceptions about what we should be talking about, where we should be taking conversations, what kind of things we need to be teaching women and educating them on. That will very naturally come when she asks those questions of you, if you start from a place of building these deeper conversations. Mm-hmm. Those things that you're so eager to educate on and make sure she's got factually correct and share all the cool tidbits and wisdom that you have, that will come. She didn't sign up for prenatal classes, she signed up for companionship, right? That's a whole different thing. So doulas, ditch the binder altogether. Those questions will naturally come up in conversation, and then you can go back and reference it if you need to. But starting off, I think getting back to woman-on-woman support is going to do us a lot more good in the long run. So thank you, Ashley. You mentioned to me that you are working in person, right? And I don't know if you're also working virtually. Yep. If you want to just share kind of what kind of work you're doing and how women can reach you, and how we, either if it's women that you're serving or if it's birth workers that you're also serving, how can those people reach you?
Yeah, I'm serving both. Really, whoever needs me, that's kind of who I'm serving. I work primarily online, so my Mondays to Thursdays are supporting people, wherever they may be and have access to the internet is online. And my booking calendar is on my Instagram, so that's easy access, which is therogue.therapist. And I also have a virtual clinic, which is mindonline.ca, and the individual who is currently on staff at the clinic is Dr. Lauren Jenkins, and she's a pediatric chiropractor and also a sleep and well-being specialist, not to be confused with a sleep trainer, and a lactation consultant as well. So she's kind of well-rounded, and I love having her on our team. And on Fridays, I locally do walk and talk therapy sessions out on trails, or for people who are just kind of not looking to leave their house. Maybe they have new babies, maybe just kind of staying in as their thing. I can meet them in their homes, and we can do therapy sessions in the comfort of their own home.
That's amazing. And where around Ontario are you located again?
I'm in Fergus, so I'm in Centre Wellington, but I go to Guelph, and I can go to Erin, maybe even Orangeville. I haven't even explored Orangeville, but perhaps Orangeville, to do walk and talk and therapy sessions in home.
Oh, amazing. Okay, so I'll wrap it up. And thanks again for jumping on. I'm glad we were able to do a little impromptu session, and I hope you have a really good rest of your afternoon, and we will continue our chats.
Yes.
Offline. All right.
Love it. Thanks so much, Sandra.
Thanks. Have a good afternoon. Bye.